Okay, I think I'm going to go ahead and get started because we do just have a couple of little housekeeping items to take care of here at the beginning, so that'll give a chance for some more folks to join us. I know this is the middle of the day and everybody has other things to do and places to be. So thank you all so much for taking the time to join us for this webinar, Sharpen Your Pencils, a parent's webinar on the rights of LGBTQ students. We have a lot of great information for you today. Again, my name is Amanda Johnston. I'm with Gay and Lesbian Advocates and Defenders, which is one of the two organizations that's presenting this webinar today, along with the GSA network, the Gay Straight Alliance Network. And you'll hear a little bit more about the GSA network in a little while, but I just wanted to let you all know who GLAD is. Gay and Lesbian Advocates and Defenders is a legal advocacy organization that works in New England and nationally to advance the rights of LGBT and HIV positive people. And we do that through the courts, as well as through public policy and through education like this webinar today. We also have some other organizations who have partnered with us to get the word out about this great information, and you can see all of them up there on your screen today, on that slide there. So we want to give a big thank you to all of those organizations. I want to just give you a little bit of information about how things are going to work. If you have questions during the webinar, you can ask them via the chat box that should be on the right of your screen. You should be able to just type in the question and we'll forward it to the presenters here. And we're going to take some time for questions at the end to answer any questions that don't get answered throughout the presentation. You also have other options for information. You're going to see a couple of slides throughout the presentation that list some resources, and then again at the end of the presentation there'll be a slide with some resources for further information. These will all be available. We'll send the slides out to everybody who registered for the webinar today, so don't worry about having to write all of this down. We'll provide you with this information. There's some great resources listed in this presentation. And then I want to just let you know about GLAD Answers, which is GLAD's legal information hotline, where you can contact us at gladanswers.org and speak to somebody who can provide you with further information, publications, resources, and also legal referrals if you need additional help with an issue you're facing. So, and then also I just want to let you know that we are recording this webinar, so the webinar itself will be available to watch going forward. So now it's my pleasure to turn you over to Senior Staff Attorney at GLAD, Vicki Henry, who's going to kick off the content portion.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm excited to talk to you about the rights of LGBT students in schools. So I am leading GLAD's youth initiative, and I work with another attorney here at GLAD, Allison Wright, and actually several of the GLAD attorneys are working to enforce the legal rights of LGBTQ youth. We're focusing today on the rights of public school students. I'm happy to take questions at the end about private school students, but they're in a different category. And our focus is right now based on the laws in New England and federal laws. So anything I say about federal law would apply to all 50 states, and then some of what I say about New England would apply to other states. We have links here to get information about your state's laws. In terms of the topics today, we're going to cover bullying and harassment, as well as anti-discrimination law, the rights of GSAs and school clubs, student rights around freedom of expression, and rights related to gender identity and expression. We're going to start with bullying and harassment, and in this section I'm going to talk about reporting problems to the schools. I'm talking about bullying here, but you would use the same process to report other issues that you're having with your child's school. And of course, we are very much about youth empowerment, so you want to be talking to your student and making sure that what you are doing is working together with your student. In terms of bullying, harassment, and anti-discrimination, all of the New England states have anti-bullying laws and/or anti-discrimination laws that protect students based on their sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, and there are also federal laws that protect people based on HIV status. Federal law also can provide some very important protections against discrimination on the basis of sex and gender nonconformity. So that can provide protection and is providing a lot more protection right now for transgender students, but it also can protect students based on sexual orientation if there's a manifestation where you are not conforming to sexual stereotypes. So I want to be clear for your purposes that bullying and harassment have very specific legal meanings. If you click on the links on prior slides, we have a chart that analyzes the definitions, for example, of bullying in the 6 New England states, and they're very specific. But I don't want you to get bogged down in this if your student is having trouble at a school. Basically, you want to be checking your school's anti-bullying policy, but the bottom line from your point of view is if it's mean, the school should intervene. So if there is some behavior that students are engaging in against your student or another student, you can report and the school should be doing something about it. And that's where we would have a concern if the school is not. So don't get too bogged down on these definitions. And I say because, for example, in all of the New England states except New Hampshire, you have to have repeated acts, more than one, for something to be bullying. New Hampshire will allow one very significant act. So schools can get tied up in some of those definitions. So the first thing I want to do is I want to encourage you to intervene early or even pre-intervene. Bullying does not get better with age. What it does do is it snowballs, it widens, the circle widens, more students are involved, and it becomes harder to contain. One of the frustrations I've had here at GLAD is that we will typically get a call that says that my student has suffered for some period of time, and 3 years seems to be that period of time, and then at that point the student has snapped basically, and there are very limited options because they just want out of the school. So I would really encourage people to nip this in the bud and get in early. But I'd also encourage people to really strategize their approach to the school. You know, you want to think about how am I going to get the best positive response out of the school to do what I want them to do. So for example, schools will often say to me they don't have the energy or the resources or the money to deal with bullying, and my response to that is I have pulled together plenty of statistics that show that schools that have a better school climate and lower bullying have higher test scores. That doesn't seem like rocket science to me. It makes a lot of sense. If you're worried about being bullied, you're not doing your best in terms of studying, you're not doing your best school performance. But that's where we're trying to show schools that if they do what we want, it's actually good for them. You know, another example I give to people is that there was a serious incident at my child's school, and you know, the first line of my email to the school was that I hear it's very difficult to be you today because this bad thing happened, and I'm really sorry to hear it, and now I need to raise with you what my concerns are about how we go forward. So, you know, trying to be on the same side of the table. Now, that doesn't always work. Sometimes you do have to go adversarial and really force the school's hand, particularly if you've got someone who's just not doing their job. But I would definitely start off with a positive, and I would, if you can, you know, be a positive force at your child's school, being involved in whatever ways parents can support the school community. In terms of strategizing your approach beforehand, you can ask in advance now, today, tomorrow. You can say, how will staff respond if a student says that's so gay? Which is very common, I'm sure you know, in our schools today because students don't really understand how harmful it can be. You can also ask, how will the school handle X behavior, whatever the behavior is that might be of concern to you. And certainly if you have a transgender child, you're going to be asking questions about whether they can use bathrooms and locker rooms consistent with their gender identity. And if the answer is no, you're going to start an education process with them, and then you may need to escalate that. But of course, you always want to review the school's handbooks and policies. The nice thing about this World Wide Web world we live in is that all this information is essentially available online, as far as I can tell, for all schools. We at GLAD also wanted to make sure that schools knew what our expectations were, so we've created a legal checklist for school administrators that basically tells them what we believe their legal obligations are and puts them on fair notice that they need to meet these legal obligations or they're subject to being sued. Now, unfortunately, sometimes bullying happens, and so then you are dealing with the aftermath of the bullying. And here I think it's very important to know that you need to create a record. If you have an oral report and the school doesn't do what it's supposed to do, it's very hard to prove later that you made a report. And memories fade, and it's your word against somebody else's word, or your student's word against somebody else's word. So you want to create a record. It can be email. Email's lovely, actually, because you can show exactly when you sent it, and then you can get the school's response back together. So you want to create a record, and if they have a form they really want you to fill out, then cooperate and fill out their form. But don't let the form be such a burden that you can't make your report. The key things you want to cover are what happened and when. And I would avoid broad sweeping general language like somebody bullied my child. I would be very specific on this date, this child, name the child or children, choked my kid on the bus, pushed my kid into the locker, whatever the very specific thing is. And you want to identify, if you can, if there were witnesses. If the bullying involves cyberbullying, then you need to take screenshots and you need to, or print the posts out. But you want to create some sort of record. Most computers have a way to create a screenshot because people can go back and they can delete what their posts were. And while there are ways to deal with that, it becomes much more complicated. It's better just to take the screenshots. I will mention here, I am a parent myself. I realize how hard it can be to monitor what your students are doing on the internet, and reading some of the email might make your brains liquefy because they're really talking about like who's going to eat lunch with who and things that you probably don't want to actually read. But it's the only way for you to know what is happening online is for you to check in occasionally and monitor these posts. And of course you want to keep track of the person to whom you reported. You also want to make sure you remain calm and positive, and acknowledge that you might not have the whole story, or you might not have someone else's perspective. And the key thing here is, and this is where I think a lot of schools can be very, whether it's intentional or not, difficult to deal with, because you want to determine from the school that they agree that something happened or they disagree about something happened. And they should be notifying you if they have substantiated bullying or harassment. And I think there can be a breakdown here. I'd like to say it's because schools are busy, but for whatever the reason, you need that back. Because once the school buys in that something's happening that shouldn't have happened, then it needs to have a plan, or it and you working together need to have a plan to keep your child safe and to respond to mean behavior. And you need to make sure you're on board with that plan. And you want to basically evaluate whether the response is effective, whether it's going to do what you need done for your child. If there's a problem in the school parking lot, then is the plan to protect your student in the parking lot going to work? If it's a problem in a particular hallway, what's the plan? And you want to make sure that the schools are basically meeting their obligations here and that you're comfortable with what the plan is supposed to be. There are some serious red flags that if these things are happening, I would encourage you to call Glad Answers or get legal help, because there's plenty of research that shows that schools should not be doing certain things. They should not blame the target student, in other words, the student who's been the subject of bullying. So if you hear, oh, if you would just tone it down, or your student is too flamboyant, those are warning signs that the school is blaming your student, and that would be very concerning to me. Similarly, they shouldn't penalize your child for being bullied. They should be making sure they're not somehow restricting your child's rights or opportunities. One common thing we've heard of is a lot of schools will adopt what they call an eyes-on policy, where they're supposed to be watching the target student. So most students who are being bullied already feel some social isolation, and so then having a bunch of adults with their eyes on that student just heightens the social isolation, which is exactly the worst thing that a school can do. So unless your student really wants that, and I've only met one kid or heard of one kid who wanted that, then you need to tell them, no, their eyes should be on the student who's doing the bullying, because chances are they're bullying more than just your kid. And here is probably the biggest red flag of all. If they leave the student who's been targeted for bullying alone with the harasser or harassers to work things out, that is documented as being very damaging, and schools should not be doing that. Bullying typically involves a power imbalance, and it's just completely inappropriate to leave the students alone to work things out. And of course, as they're doing that, they're asking your student if that's okay, and most students are going to say yes, it's okay, even when it is not. So those are things that are all red flags that you should be looking at. As I said, we've put in a link here to a document that charts out all the details of the bullying laws in the 6 New England states, and it gives you the definition of bullying, and it tells you whether school staff have a training responsibility, whether they have reporting obligations. You can really drill down into the details of what your state law is on bullying. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my co-presenter.
Okay, hi, this is actually Amanda again, and I'm just going to go ahead and turn you over to Alan in just a second, but while we're getting ready to do that, Alan's going to talk about GSAs and school clubs, and I'm going to start off with just a poll for everyone, and the poll is going to pop up in just a second. While I'm doing that, I just want to say I know a few people have joined us since we started. We are recording this webinar, and we'll be sending out a link to the recording and to every resource that we have in there, so that you don't have to worry about having missed anything. You'll have links to look at all that stuff. So you should be seeing a poll there about asking whether or not your school or the school, your child's school, has a GSA or a or another LGBT club. If you want to just answer, that'll be something we can share the information with everybody and just see. And Alan's going to talk a little bit about how GSAs are helpful and how adult advocates can help support them. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Alan.
Great, thank you so much. So thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Alan Ratliff, and I am the National Network Manager for the Gay Straight Alliance Network. We are a youth-driven organization that focuses on empowering youth activists to fight homophobia and transphobia in schools. One of the things that we're making sure that we do is that we fully advocate and support young people's leadership and give them the resources that they need in order to become leaders and activists in their schools, because they're the best ones to know whether or not they're being bullied, or they're the best ones to know and fight against any types of unsafe environments in schools. Vicki did a really, really amazing job about talking about how you as parents can support your student if they're being bullied. And I would also wanted to add a little caveat to that, in that young people who are in schools are not just being bullied, they're also queer or holding hands with their significant others when they see their straight counterparts being able to do that. So I just got the results in, and there are, from what I see, 27% say yes, they have a GSA, 4% say no, and I'm not sure how many said don't know. Is that correct? Okay, great. So that's great. I think one of the main parts of making sure that we have safer schools is to actually know whether or not we have a GSA. So let me double check. Let me see. Can folks see my screen? Okay, let's see. Having a little bit of technical difficulties. How about now? Does that look good? Awesome. Great. So you didn't get to see. Who's Alan Ratliff? I'm the National Network Manager. So when understanding and knowing about GSAs and knowing whether or not your school has a GSA, it's really important to identify the need for that. If your school doesn't have a GSA and you feel like there needs to be one, there are three main components that come into starting a GSA in schools.
Oh.
Has non-curricular.
Sorry, Alan and everyone. It sounds like you're having a little bit of audio difficulty, and I apologize. I know, Alan, you're cutting in and out.
Okay. Hello?
Yes, that sounds good. We can hear you.
Okay, great. So I apologize for that. So what I was saying was, if your school doesn't have a GSA and you want and you feel like one needs to start, however you're getting some pushback from administration, one of your big main tools is the Federal Equal Access Act, which states that if a school has any kind of non-curricular clubs, they must allow a GSA, and they must treat that GSA equally to the other clubs that are around. Additionally, if it's a public funded school, so say a public school lot of challenges when it comes to starting GSAs as a result of pushback from administration, but it's important to understand the law, understand what your students' rights are to start that. So some folks are wondering what are GSAs. There are some folks who know what gay-straight alliances are, and some folks who may have misconceptions. Gay-straight alliances are basically student clubs in a high school or middle school that brings together LGBTQ and their straight allies to support each other, provide a safe space for one another, socialize, and in a lot of cases, creating a platform for activism so that they can combat homophobia and transphobia in their schools. There are three main types of GSAs in the ways that we categorize them. There's a support GSA, mostly focusing on creating a safe space for young people who may not be out, who may be facing talk to other folks about their experiences. Additionally, there are social GSAs which focus a lot more on like movie nights. It's also creating a safe space, but they also socialize with one another and whatnot. So, and then there's also the activist GSAs, where the young people are actually taking the opportunities to advocate for themselves on days of silence, weeks of action, in addition to advocating for school policies, fair school policies. Now, if you look at the slide right here, there are actually these circles, concentric circles, and so just because there's an activist GSA doesn't mean that there can't be they can't serve a social purpose and a support purpose. And so what we try to do is work with the GSAs to focus on creating better schools, creating better spaces in their schools. Trying to get to the next slide. So how do GSAs benefit the students? I think there's three main components that we see as values of GSAs for students. The first is to end isolation. Oftentimes, if you are the only out LGBT student, it could feel very isolated. And so what we hope, what we know is that when GSAs form, it helps end this isolation of being the only one who identifies in a certain way. Additionally, it creates safer schools. So just the mere presence of having GSAs in the schools shows an improvement in school climate. Various studies have shown that through GLSEN reports as well as in reports that we do at GSA Network. And then additionally, the GSAs serve a purpose in developing student leaders, and that's a huge component to the work that we do, is that we want to make sure that we are developing the leaders for of empowerment to make it better in their schools. And so these young people have those opportunities to advocate for themselves and advocate for the clubs, and they can take these leadership skills beyond to whatever they try to be part of, whether it's in college or you know, in their presentations at school. We do see a lot of leaders that are developed out of these clubs. So with all that being said, GSA Network is a national organization. So we actually have different members through our National Association of GSA Networks. And so what's really great about it is that we work with local partners in different states. With these local partners in these different states, they know what's best in their communities. We have 37 members throughout the country, and we support them in supporting other GSAs. So in New England alone, we have 5 of the 6 states represented. We have New Hampshire, I'm sorry, not New Hampshire. New Hampshire's the only one we don't have, unfortunately. But we do have Vermont, Maine, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island as local GSA networks that are supporting the development of GSAs. So these networks participate in monthly calls. They collaborate with one another, and for the most part in their states, their purpose is to network and support GSAs. To be able to connect with one another and support one another and to share best practices. They also train student leaders to giving them resources, having camps, oftentimes summits, and different opportunities for young people to actually take a leadership role and train one another. Their ultimate goal is to transform schools into safer spaces. So we're doing this through a grassroots organizing model where the GSA networks actually provide support to the different high schools and to the different GSAs to make sure that they can advocate for themselves. And that's a huge part, that's a huge component to the work that we're doing, because we want to make sure that the young people are not only just changing policies in their schools, but that young people in the state, on the state level, that the policies are impacting everyone in their state. So the big question is, if GSA Network focuses on a youth leadership model and the young people are doing it, how can you as parents they're doing? So these are like, so I broke down the different areas in which young people actually are present. And that's including homes, schools, and communities. As a parent, one of the most important things is to create a safe space where students feel comfortable with you to talk about their identity. Young people oftentimes are trying to discover themselves and think and process who they are as individuals. And so when it comes to their identity, it's really important to support them. There's some folks who identify as being gender fluid. So one day they may want to present themselves as female, the other day they may want to present themselves as male, and another day they might want to present themselves as neither male or female. So it's really important to be supportive of that and making sure that they have a positive home environment, which I know that you all already do because you're on this webinar, right? So, and I think the other component is to ask what's going on in school. Ask them how things are going. Ask them what are some challenges to them in school. Are they having trouble with the testing? Do they feel uncomfortable at school? Do they feel uncomfortable changing in locker rooms? That's a huge piece, because a lot of schools require young people to actually change in locker rooms and do physical education. And this oftentimes, if you are trans or not gender nonconforming, sometimes it might not be a comfortable situation for you to be changing in the locker room. And then oftentimes, in order to graduate from school, you have to have a PE credit, and so you fail that, and you're forced out of school in some spaces. The other component is to think about schools. The main thing, one of the things to get involved is either joining your local PTA or PTO organization and getting involved with the school and finding out what's going on. I think a big component, like for the folks who don't know whether or not there's a GSA in their school, is to ask if there is a GSA. And if there isn't a GSA, what can you do to support that? Oftentimes, we see a lot of, at least in my work, I've seen a lot of parents who are supporting their students in their GSAs by not only providing like baked goods for bake sales, but then at the same time realizing that some students if their GSE's meetings after school, some students aren't able to get that public transportation to get home or have any transportation to get home. So being able and available to carpool and make sure those young people are doing that. Finally, I think getting involved in the community, getting involved with your local GSA network is really, really important. If you have the time and the capacity to do so. Again, when it comes to advocating for your student at the local and state level for policies, but then also it's providing any kind of support through volunteering at these organizations, because a lot of times these organizations are under-resourced. So if you have any questions about where your local GSA network is, I'm actually going to show you the slide right here, which will be shown at the end as well. So in Connecticut, True Colors is a GSA network, Listen Southern Maine, Massachusetts Commission on LGBT Youth, Youth Pride Inc., which is based out of Providence, and then Outright Vermont, based out of Burlington. So with all that being said, feel free to ask any questions that you may have. I'm more than happy to answer them towards the end of the call. And I'm going to go ahead and pass this back over to Vicki.
Great. Thank you, Alan. And I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation back over to Vicki. And just again, let everybody know that this is being recorded, and we are going to go ahead and make sure that everybody gets the information. I know there was some audio dropout on Alan's presentation, and we'll make sure we have notes from him to include when we send out the information, so you get all the great details that he provided. All right, Vicki.
Thank you, and thank you, Alan. So we do know that schools throw up roadblocks to forming GSAs. We've dealt with all of them, whatever their excuse. They may stall on the formation. They might say, well, do you have to put gay in the title? That's a big one. Really don't like that. And you have the right to name the club. You have the right to form the club. So, be in touch with us. Those are things that we definitely can overcome. And what you don't want to do, again, is wait. You want to get on this stuff at the beginning of the year, especially if you have a senior, because schools will run out the clock on them and they'll graduate. So now I want to turn over to freedom of expression, which is typically protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution, but also might have some protections under state law or state constitutions. And this is an area that provides a lot of protection for students. So they're in an enforced custodial situation, and that they are going to the public school, and that mixes lots of people together, and they have the right to participate in the marketplace of ideas and express their opinions and their ideas with certain limitations, because people have to be at school. And so, they have to be respectful, and and of course the other side also has rights of expression, but they cannot cross the line of interfering with another student's education or bullying that other student. So that can come up in a variety of contexts, including expressive T-shirts, or that they want to write their paper on a particular topic that is LGBTQ positive. Another place that we see expression rights that are infringed upon in school is around internet access. Most public schools have an internet filter, and as someone who's a parent, I'm perfectly fine with that. I actually think it's a great idea. But what happens is that some of the companies that sell these filters equate LGBTQ with sex, and they screen out particularly the positive websites and allow students access to the negative websites. That's not okay, and in our slides here we'll have a link to a very short form that your student can take to school and test to see if the internet is filtered. Again, that's pretty clear case law on this, that we can get students' rights protected here, and we can get schools to do the right thing. If your student does not want to do it, you're more than welcome to take it and talk to the principal or school administrator. This is actually one of those things you can pre-strategize about and make sure things are good at your kid's school. Proms and dances are a huge part of the school experience, and you want to make sure that your student is included if that's something that they want to do. So LGBTQ students must be able to attend dances on the same basis as other students. Actually, one of the early cases that put GLAAD on the map was back in the 1970s around a student who wanted to go to the prom in Rhode Island. That was actually when I first heard of GLAD, and I have to say I was not yet a teenager, but Walter Cronkite was on there talking about the right of students to take a date of the same sex to the prom. And schools should not be imposing any extra limitations on them, like, for example, that they have to have a permission slip to bring a date of the same sex. And that same rule applies actually with the school clubs, too. You shouldn't have to have a permission slip to go to the GSA if you don't need a permission slip to go to other clubs. Similarly, in terms of attending the dances, students should be able to dress consistent with their gender identity. We have heard some anecdotal reports of schools telling, for example, a transgender boy that he could not come to the dance unless he wore a dress. And I think that would definitely run afoul of federal law, but you have to push back on the school. So I do want to talk about gender identity and expression, which is a very important part of GLAD's work and an area that is really just exploding with interventions and with the rights of students, which I think is very exciting. So GLAD worked very carefully with the Departments of Education and the other state agencies in both Massachusetts and Connecticut to get guidance issued about how those states should implement their laws that prohibit discrimination based on gender identity, in particular in schools. The guidance that was produced, we have the links here. Obviously, if you're in one of those states, the guidance is very helpful. But even if you don't live in one of those states, I would strongly encourage you to read the guidance. And Massachusetts came out second, so we built on what we learned from Connecticut. I'd encourage you to read that. It gives very specific, concrete examples of questions that schools might face and how we believe that schools should respond to them. Some of these areas, schools might push back on, and we might have to enforce rights. But basically, you're going to want to be, if your child is to this point, you're going to want to be talking to the school about addressing your child by their preferred name and pronouns and not making mistakes on that, and getting their school records to be in alignment with that, basically, and to talk to other students to make sure those preferred names and pronouns are respected. You also want to be talking to your school about dress, that your child will be dressing consistent with their gender identity. Sports is another huge part of the school experience, and at this point students should be participating in sports based on their gender identity. Each one of the New England states has its own way of dealing or not dealing with the topic, but in Massachusetts, for example, there's a state regulation that says that students participate in sports consistent with their gender identity. There are express protections in Connecticut. Up in Maine, the School Principals Association has issued some guidelines about how to address students' participation in athletics, and there's actually a process for students to go through to make sure they can participate in sports based on gender identity. Bathrooms and locker rooms, for many transgender students, access to the sex-segregated facilities based on their gender identity is very important, and if they can't have it, it interferes with their learning process, and that is really the hook that you want to be thinking about. Is this interfering with my child's ability to get an education? And so you want to be having those conversations with schools. I'll give you an example of an intervention that we did here at GLAD. So somebody called, and the school was very clear at the beginning of the year here in Massachusetts they would not let a student use their preferred names and pronouns or use the bathrooms consistent with their gender identity. So the first thing we did was have the parent give the school the guidance that came from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. But the second thing we did was make sure that the parent explained to the school why this was better for all students to just start off the school year on the right foot, which was to have this student changing bathrooms midway through the school year was going to be more difficult for everybody than if they just let the student start the school year and live consistently with her gender identity. And the school actually listened to that reasoning and relented. I always joke that on the overnight trips, those band kids are traveling all over the world, and that can cause some challenges. It's pretty common that the school comes back and says, well, you can go on the overnight trip, but you have to stay in your own room with your parent, and you have to pay more money for your hotel room. Or they'll say your transgender boy can stay in a room with boys, but you have to tell all the parents of the other boys in that room that your child is transgender. I don't think they can do that. I don't think it's permissible, and we've just gotten some good process from the Federal Department of Education Office of Civil Rights that reached a settlement agreement with the school district out in California, allowing the student to take those overnight trips based on his gender identity and to access bathrooms and locker rooms. So that is a precedent that we can now show to schools here in New England, and we already know it's had effect with some New England schools. Then last but not least, of course, is confidentiality. There is federal law on the privacy of educational records, and you can talk to the school about making certain information confidential, including your child's assigned sex at birth and their birth name, and that information should be kept confidential. I can tell you there are places we know where problems come up, and so you want to just be on top of it. Substitute teachers and substitute bus drivers are right there, a recipe for disaster. So you need to be on top of the school and make sure that the bus drivers and the substitute school teachers know what the situation is and what, or that they will not be given the wrong information and not know to correct for it. So you want to be on top of that. There's some other places where we know there are issues related to gender identity and expression, and I want to flag them for you because I found that people tend to be blindsided by them, and they just come up and can really mar what should be a celebratory time. So one of them is graduation robes. I grew up in the Midwest where we all wore the same color, but it's very common here in New England for the boys to wear one color and the girls to wear another, and typically the girls wear white. We'll speculate on why that is. And so that can cause some trauma to a gender nonconforming or transgender student. If you want to raise this with your school, and I encourage you to do so, I would encourage you to raise that now, before they've ordered the robes. I think it's very difficult for schools to change if you're talking to them in May. So think about that now and ask them, what's the legitimate educational purpose for segregating children based on their sex at this point? Class lines by gender is another very common practice, especially in the elementary schools. Why? What's the educational purpose it serves? Why are they making this distinction? Prom dress codes and dance dress codes can be another area that can blindside people, as can National Honor Society dress codes or ceremonies. So think about those so that those go smoothly for your student. And then last but not least, we've had a few phone calls related to historical reenactments, particularly in the elementary schools where a family maybe is still trying to come to terms with what is their child's situation, and suddenly the fifth grade teacher is telling you that your gender nonconforming child is going to have to dress like a girl in the 1800s, and that is very traumatic for your child, and you have to go through that process and educate the teacher. In fact, actually, that was one of the first calls I got at GLAD, was a Revolutionary War period historical reenactment, and we were able to educate the teacher that it turns out that pretty much in every war in the history of this country, women have actually dressed up as men and served in our military. Some with the acknowledgement, including during the Revolutionary War, of Congress and a pension. So we do education to try to get interventions to educate the school. So I want to make sure that you have some bottom line takeaways, and this is that slide. Once your student is attending school, they have a right to attend a safe school, and they should be free from sexual orientation discrimination, and particularly around bullying, and free from gender identity and expression discrimination. Again, they should not be harassed or bullied on those grounds, and free from sex discrimination. They do also have the right to express themselves within the normal rules of schools, like you can't be vulgar, for example, and they have a right to form school clubs on the same terms as other clubs and have those clubs treated the same. So same access to bulletin boards and PA systems and bus trips and other events and activities. So those are the bottom line rights that you want to make sure that your school is enforcing. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vicki. And I'm starting to see some questions come in here, and I'm just going to go ahead and bring up a couple of slides while the questions come in. And you're seeing on your screen now, you should be a resources page, which has some of the resources that were talked about in the presentation, though not all of them, and some additional ones. And one of those is the GLAD Youth website, which has a lot of information geared towards LGBTQ youth in a wide variety of settings aside from school. as well as in school, the GSA Network site, and then a couple of the resources that Vicki mentioned, the school administrator's checklist, the Massachusetts and Connecticut guidance for treatment of transgender students, and some links to some fact sheets there as well. Just a reminder, we will be sending out all of these information and these slides, so you'll have links, you'll have the access to all of the links throughout the presentations, including the local GSA networks and the other materials that Alan presented. And I also want to just, before we go to the questions, or as we go to the questions, we have a little bit of time for that, is remind you about GLAD Answers, which is GLAD's legal information resource. And you can access that anytime at glad.org, gladanswers.org there. And you can also call us at 800-455-GLAD. And that's true whether you're in New England or outside New England. If you're calling from outside New England, we can also connect you with resources that might be more relevant to your state and your situation. So encourage you, if you don't get your questions answered today or in the presentation materials, to go ahead and contact us. So far I have one question. I know Alan got another question that he responded to, and he may talk a little bit more about the local GSA networks. But the question is, and I have Alan and Vicki, your mics are both open, so the question is, on gender identity expression, what about a transgender student wanting to run for homecoming king/queen in accordance with preferred gender, such as what is going on in Johnstown, Pennsylvania with Casey Karen? So, Vicki?
Oh, thank you. So I'm not familiar with that particular situation, but I think that whether you're in a New England state or elsewhere, you're going to look to the federal law for protection, and you look to Title IX and whether or not there's discrimination based on sex. I think it's also that we do have some laws that would protect you in the specific New England states, and I'm thinking, for example, about really all the New England states except New Hampshire does not have a specific anti-discrimination law for transgender students, but there are still these federal protections apply. And you're going to do a lot of educating with the community, educating with the fellow students, to try to make sure that it stays as a positive experience for that youth and the general community.
Okay, so I don't see other questions coming in. If you have a question, feel free to type it in your chat window, and we'll answer it. If not, Alan, I don't know if you want to address, like one attendee raised the question of why doesn't New Hampshire have a local GSA network, and that just raised the question for me. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how those local GSA networks form, if people are in a state that doesn't have one, what resources they have at their disposal.
Yeah, definitely. So the way that we've tried to do our work is focusing a lot on what's already being done on the ground. So there are different states that are doing GSA work, and in varying capacities. So what we tend to do is that we try to do outreach to those states and identify an organization or a group that's doing GSA work in that state. Currently, we haven't had as much success with New Hampshire because we haven't been able to identify an organization or come into contact with an organization that is doing GSA work with us, or doing GSA work in general. So if anybody knows of any organizations in New Hampshire, I think that's something that I've been trying to do some outreach for in the past year. We would love to have New Hampshire as a part of the National Association. One thing about that, though, is that we have a steering committee for the National Association that votes on whether or not the member can become a member, and usually it goes through without a hitch, but again, there's certain guidelines and certain benchmarks that these organizations have to meet, or these groups have to meet, in order to be part of the National Association. Something that I do want to say is that there are different types of networks. There are networks that are actually part of state government. For instance, the in Massachusetts, the Mass Commission on LGBT Youth. There are organizations that are programs of larger nonprofit organizations like Outright Vermont, and there's some that are just standalone organizations that focus on GSAs. So there are different ways to get into that. There's also, for instance, in Maine, it's a GLSEN chapter, so they're an all-volunteer group. So there are varying ways to get involved and actually have a local GSA network. But if folks are interested or want to know of any resources, they could definitely email me. Feel free to email me and I can give them the resources that I have. It won't necessarily be New Hampshire specific, but a lot of the stuff kind of goes across the board. So yeah, so my information is available for folks to get on. Additionally, if you go to gsanetwork.org/resources, there's some information there about how to start a GSA or how to support a GSA development, in addition to a GSA Advisor Handbook.
Great. All right. Thank you, Alan. A couple of other questions have come in. One I'll answer really quickly. Somebody asked, are there any support groups in the greater Boston area for LGBTQ youth outside of GSAs? And yes, absolutely there are. There's an entire AGLI network, LGBTQ youth network across the state, as well as other specific organizations like Boston Glass and others. If you go to glad.org/youth, there's a resources tab at the top of the page that lists and links to a bunch of organizations in Massachusetts as well as in the other New England states and some national organizations as well. So I encourage you to do that. There are a lot of great organizations out there supporting LGBTQ youth and also, of course, parents and families of LGBTQ youth. So we have a couple more questions, which I'll pass over to Vicki to field. One is, how closely are the LGBT rights discussed today related to those for undergraduate and graduate students?
Oh, that's a really great question, actually. The federal law, Title IX, definitely applies to any educational institution, including colleges, universities, and postgraduate students. The Equal Access Act is applicable to secondary schools, so that wouldn't necessarily apply. Even in Massachusetts, our act relative to gender identity applies to schools, which is K through 12, basically. So for the undergrad or really post-high school education, largely you're going to be looking to federal law, and you might be looking to the school's anti-discrimination policies. So you do want to consider that question, and you want to consider, as you're looking at schools, what their experience has been. Would your student, for example, be the first transgender student there, or will they have already had other people smooth the way for you? And I think that's very, very important for you to think about as your youth are going into college and beyond.
And sorry, and there's also other resources for those students on campuspride.org, which is a great resource for folks who are to identify like LGBT-friendly colleges and universities and ways they can make sure that those spaces are safe as well.
Great. Okay, we have another question that just came in. In Connecticut, are schools required by law to change records to a student's preferred name, or is that just part of best practices in the guidelines document?
I think Connecticut is actually still going through this process, and they're having some lack of clarity about how to address students' names. So I would start by asking the school to just treat the birth name and the birth sex as confidential and see if the school is willing to do that. If the school pushes back and says that it is not, then I would consider looking at a complaint to the Commission for Human Rights and Opportunities, which is something that you can talk to us about and we can help you with, or you can file on your own. I know they've been wanting to provide some additional guidance to schools and haven't seen the right opportunity yet. It is a place where Massachusetts law is a little bit different because we have common law name changes, so as long as you're not changing your name for an improper purpose, you can just change your name. So schools are still, I think, grappling with that in Connecticut, and you need to approach them and talk to them about what your concerns are. And you can also try to push them on something called FERPA, which is the Federal Educational Records Privacy Act, which does provide rights in federal law to treat every student's educational records as private. And so you can talk about this information, the birth name and the assigned birth sex, as being confidential information and encourage them to protect it under FERPA. All schools are familiar with that name or that word, and see if they will cooperate with you there. And then if they don't, then you can escalate. But as I say, I would be relentlessly polite, and I would look for positive ways to interact with the school as you are trying to get them to engage in that process.
Great. And we have a question about how can schools monitor online bullying? What can schools do about online bullying?
Well, I think there really the burden is going to be on the student and on the parents, because the school only has an obligation to act once it knows that something has happened. So if the school is, for example, now you're reminding me, so if the school has some public forum that it is moderating, then it would have an obligation to act. It used to be that schools thought, well, we only have to deal with problems that are brick and mortar problems. In other words, things that happen at the school grounds or on school property like a school bus. And if it's in the outside world, we don't have to deal with it. That is no longer true. All of the bullying laws really include cyberbullying and talk about conduct that interferes with a student's educational opportunities. So schools do have jurisdiction over cyberbullying, but you need to bring it to their attention. About a year ago, there was a public website for high school students, and someone in a town in Maine started bombarding it with anti-gay statements. And the way that website worked was if two people reported abuse, the webmaster would automatically take the bad post down, but then whoever was doing this would then post a new bad post. So the students spent all weekend being very distressed and clicking abuse and getting these posts taken down. And the school's initial reaction when it was reported to them was, well, the posts have been taken down, there's nothing we can do. And we talked to the students about requests or demands that it could make of the school, because to be honest, that is a very weak response. The school could have taken over monitoring the website. The school could have announced to the school community that this bad thing was happening and the school did not approve. The school could have had a seminar educating people about bullying. And I could come up with probably 15 more ideas of things that the school could have and should have done. So the bullying was not targeted to any particular student, but it was targeted to this community, and the school's response could have been, and I think ultimately was, stronger once pressure was applied to get the school to act.
Excellent. All right, so we have just about one more minute left, and I don't actually see any other questions coming in at this time. Vicki, I know you wanted to talk about one more resource that GLAD will have available soon before we go.
So we are very excited about the youth portal that we've launched, which you can find at glad.org/youth. You'll see tabs that are there for students and for parents and for school people. And we will be, over the next weeks and months, adding resources for you to use as examples, whether it's reporting bullying or follow-up letters with schools. And so there are resources up there now, like the comparison document for bullying laws or the internet filtering, but we'll be adding resources for you, and I think that'll be a great place for you to check back. We also have a very catchy 2-minute or 2.5-minute video that tells about the legal rights of LGBTQ youth. We have one that's specific to New Hampshire, one specific to Massachusetts, and then a New England one which applies to the other New England states. So a lot of resources. We really want to support you, and as I say, really encourage you to be proactive and not let your students suffer, and to get your student help.
Okay, great. Well, thank you to Vicki Henry and to Alan Ratliff from the GSA Network, and we are here from GLAD. I want to thank all of you again for participating today. I hope that you got some useful information out of this, and once again, we will be emailing everyone with all of the resources contained in the presentation, the slides and the links, as well as a link to the recording so that you can watch the information again, or you can also share it with anyone else who may have questions. And just a final plug, if you have any questions or need additional help or resources, you can contact us at GLAD Answers at gladanswers.org or 800-455-GLAD, and we will be happy to do whatever we can to help you out. All right, thanks everyone, and have a great day.